Hi guys, welcome to chapter 12 with Professor Ran. Very good to see you. We're going to start by discussing who the poor are. This chapter is about income inequality, is about who the poor are, what does the government do to help those who are considered underprivileged, what contributes to lower income versus higher income. So this is basically where we are with this discussion. So who are the poor? For one thing, we're looking at about at least 1/6 of Americans considered to be poor, really poor. Now, when I show you the definition of the poor by the government, you will see that it's at least twice as much as that in reality. So the government says about 47 million. We know it's really more like closer to 100 million. But let's look and see. Some of these statistics overlap, okay? So it's not going to add up to 100%, but just to give you an idea. So you have about more than half are working adults or of working age. And look at between age 18 and 64, we consider those are the people who are not retired, they are not children. About a third are children. So really, when we think of who the poor are in this country, there are way more poor who are either under 18 or over 64. And the reason being is because when people are children or retirement age, it's much harder for them to get a job. Children don't qualify, and there's a lot of age discrimination or physical inability or mental inability as we get older. Even if we want to keep going, sometimes we are not able to. But we certainly are discriminated against in the sense that very few companies want to hire a 70-year-old to do a job. And this is partly why somebody past a certain age may find themselves on the poor end instead on the wealthier end. Now, students and caregivers end up being part of this category. Makes sense, right? Caregivers don't really, they're taking care of someone, so they're not earning an income. Students are studying, they can only work so much. I know a lot of you actually work full-time and go to school full-time, and it's quite overwhelming, but that's not always sustainable. And then 12% are disabled. So disability obviously is going to land us in hot water when it comes to income earnings. Retirees, although this percentage, these numbers are not as accurate. There are more retirees than that who consider themselves poor, and we know they are by the definition of society, which basically isn't what the government tables show you. I'll re-emphasize this point in a minute. Then you have, of course, 2% like they don't really fit any particular classification. Now, biggest reasons for being poor. You only earn minimum wage. You only work part-time. Having only a high school diploma. Certainly, if you only have a high school diploma versus a bachelor's degree, you're looking at least 20% likelihood, like 20% of people are considered really poor with only a high school education, but only 2% who have a bachelor's degree. And usually their bachelor's degree don't end up being in something professional. By that I mean, like, for instance, you might have a degree in history, let's say, and it doesn't open up as many doors for you. Not that having a degree in history is not professional. That's not what I mean. I just mean it's not IT, it's not engineering, it's not going to pay as much. Single parent households, and they tend to be females. So often a typical family in poverty is a single working mom. She is working, she just doesn't make enough money, and she has too many mouths to feed. And she doesn't have a second income. Now, there are obviously households that have a male who's heading the household, so it's a single working dad. But because men tend to make, still in this country, another 14 to 30% more, depending on which race we're looking at, which area, so you can see that they still have the edge, but that's going to disadvantage them as well. Having children young, by that I mean, when people start having children at a very young age, they haven't had the ability to build a career, have a portfolio that shows their experience. They haven't had a college degree yet. That's really going to hold them back. And then wage discrimination, right? If you happen to be facing discrimination because maybe, God forbid, you have a disability, because sometimes the way a person looks, because of how old they are, because of their sex or their race, that's going to put the odds against the person. So basically, what is within your control? Professor Rand says, let's see, go to school, get a degree that earns a high income, and use condoms. Okay. Poverty by race. Obviously, there is a disadvantage, especially in the United States. I mean, there is in many countries, but we are discussing our own country here. there is a disadvantage in this country of belonging to certain ethnic groups versus others. The poorest of the poor, right here, is our Native Americans. I wish this didn't say Indians, but okay, our Native people. And those of us who really know Massachusetts very well, and we've been to Plymouth Rock, we've been educated about how many of our natives there, like the Wampanoags or the Algonquins, want us to call them Native people. So the Native people. And of course, the indigenous people of Alaska. So the indigenous people of the United States are actually the poorest of the poor. If somebody is African American, they are also as the second group that's disadvantaged, followed by the Latinx, the Latinos and Latinas. Then you have like a mixed here of various races, especially if people have more than one background, Caucasians, and just Asians alone. So Caucasians and Asians have similar numbers, and they are the least likely to face discrimination, and consequently, or least likely to be held back by so many institutional rules and neighborhoods, etc., that end up holding them back. And so you end up with this kind of disparity that's happening. Now, we compare capital societies and their level of poverty to egalitarian societies and their level of poverty. Definitely with capitalism, more people end up being in poverty. And that's because there is less of a safety net. And so when we say egalitarian, we're going to be, in this case, for the sake of our discussion, focusing on Scandinavian nations and Denmark in particular. Now, what does it mean to have an egalitarian society? Okay, I don't want you to think that everybody makes the same income. That's not possible. The person making you a cup of coffee at a cafe cannot be making the same income as a neurologist, cannot be making the same income as the president of a country, etc. So, not making the same income. It's just that the majority of the people are in the middle class. Middle, upper middle, lower middle, but middle class. Are there millionaires and billionaires? Sure, even billionaires. Are there poor people? Yes, but much, much smaller percentages of poor people. So what ends up happening is you have a society with, here's key here, equal access to opportunity. And here's what I mean by that, guys. For instance, in the United States, the school you go to, the program you attend, the amount of money the school has to pay its teachers, to bring you equipment, to keep you warm, to give you, a nice grass to play games on, etc., is dependent on how high the property values are in town. So often what schools do is they depend on property taxes to fund the schools. Sometimes there's lottery money, there could be other ways, but often what's happening is this. If you live in a zip code where property values are higher and you're paying more in taxes, you're probably attending a better school system growing up. That prepares you for life in a way that the kid whose parents live in a neighborhood where property values are lower and the parents are contributing less. So basically, if in the first place your income is lower, therefore your property values are lower, your kids don't go to as good of a school that spends as much money on their education and preparedness for life. And so that's going to create a significant disadvantage. And the other thing that happens is in a town like that, the library is not available at all. Or if there is a library, it's not frequented enough. Transportation is an issue. Parents are working longer hours. There are just so many reasons at that point to create disparity. And so, for instance, studies have shown that in a typical impoverished home, the average home has about 1.9 books, basically less than 2 books in a household. But when we look at the top 20% of income earners, we find versus the bottom 20%, we begin to see that the average home can actually have something like in excess of 98 books. So why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant because first of all, if you're buying books, you have more income. You're not worried about, oh my God, I can either buy a book or pay my electric bill kind of thing. But also it shows you that the parents are bringing in a certain amount of information and access to their children when they have more income that the poorer family cannot. I mean, if your parents are working 12 hours a day, they are not helping you with your homework like the parent who maybe is working 8 hours a day. And those are just issues that can really create disparity in a society. So an egalitarian society here focuses on income inequality and distribution, right? Now, it's really mostly about equal access to opportunity. College that is for free. If you have the grades, that's it. You're in, you're going to get that degree. There are poor kids who don't qualify for scholarships, but they're bright enough to get a degree, but that degree is too expensive for them, especially if they also have to work and chip in. So we know that equal access to opportunity isn't true in the United States. Even in the same town, from like the north part of the town to the south part of the town, there could be significant differences in access to opportunity. So is egalitarianism the answer? I'm going to come back and answer that in the next video, since we are kind of at the time limit for video 1. I'll see you in video 2.